Hey, everybody, this is Jimmy. Welcome to the Jimmy Tingle Show with Politics Code Blue. We have a very special guest for you today, folks. That's right, an author who has written the definitive book on how the younger generation, specifically Gen Z, is going to take over the world, ladies and gentlemen, or at least save the world, put it that way. The name of this book is How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America. The name of the book is Fight. Please welcome my guest, John Della Volpe. This man is at the IOP, the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He is the head of the polling division. But right now, please welcome John Della Volpe. John, this book is fantastic. Thank you for joining us today.
It's such a pleasure to be with you, Jimmy, and thank you so much for the kind words about the book.
Oh, it's great. It's written in simple, clear language about Generation Z. The Zoomers, as John refers to them. I love that term, the Zoomers. Well, just to speak to the quality of John Della Volpe's polling ability, out of all the pollsters that were bearing all this heartbreaking news for the Democrats in the 2022 midterms, the Democrats are going to get killed. There's a red wave coming. The Democrats are going to lose 40, 50, 60 seats in the House. All this nonsense. Mr. Della Volpe over here was telling people, oh, no, not so fast. Your numbers were different, John, and just give us a little window into the role that young people played when it came to the 2022 midterm elections.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for recognizing that, Jimmy. What I talked about in the days leading up to the election, I spent a lot of time on MSNBC, and I said, listen, I'm not sure if this is going to be a red wave. I'm not sure if this is going to be a blue wave. But I'm guaranteeing you there will be a Gen Z wave, okay? And that's what happened. We saw specifically in the key battleground states, we saw turnout that eclipsed or was very close to eclipsing modern records, number one. And then we saw support for Democrats that honestly was off the charts. For example, John Fetterman won close to 75% of the youth vote. 75%. It's
what state
an
was that?
Outrageous number. That was in Pennsylvania. You know, Mark Kelly in Arizona for the Senate looked to get over 70%. So listen, the votes of everybody over the age of 30 were the reason that Democrats hold the Senate today, and the reason that Kevin McCarthy is holding on to the House, you know, by his fingertips here. That younger people overwhelmingly supported Democrats, and they voted at numbers we frankly most people had not expected. It was just a misreading of, I think, the passion of the youth electorate and how much polling has changed and needs to change and evolve in this Trump era.
But for the audience, just describe what is Generation Z and what age group are we talking about?
Here's the simple way I think about this, okay? If you are younger and you remember September 11th and September 12th and 13th, how we all came together after that tragedy, you're squarely in the millennial camp. Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't, or if your memory is hazy, like my kids, they were in first grade and preschool during that time, you're squarely in Gen Z. And what that means is you don't have a living memory of America standing up, you know, and being at our best. And I think that's such a key component of what makes Gen Z Gen Z.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about they turning their fear and passion into positive action, what is their fear based on?
Well, it depends upon, I think, who you're talking to. I'll never forget, I talk about in the book, a young woman from the Midwest. She said, listen, the way people like you and your generation think about your taxes, you know, or your paycheck, you know, and that stress, she said, that's the stress that we have every single day. Every time they walk into a classroom, an auditorium, a theater, they're carrying the weight of whether or not there'll be another mass shooting, whether there'll be gun violence. That's just one example in terms of the fear. There's also tremendous fear about kind of the economic opportunities, right? Can they afford an education? Can they afford an education, have a profession, and live in their hometown and be able to afford a basic life, right? That's something that also weighs them down. Of course, concerns about the future of the planet and climate and their environment, another fear. And today, one of the things that makes me optimistic, makes me hopeful, is that they talk about the fears in trying to protect the rights of those more vulnerable than even themselves. Younger people who are identify in the LGBTQ community as an example, young immigrants as an example. So these are among the areas that gives them fear, stresses them out. But again, when you're faced with fear, Jimmy, you could turn away or you can lean in, right? And I think what is emblematic about this generation is they're standing up and they're fighting. It's a little bit of an homage fight. It's an homage to my hometown of Brockton, Massachusetts, a place that had such world-renowned fighters in the day. Yeah.
World-renowned, you're not kidding. Rocky Marciano and then marvelous Marvin Hagler.
Right on. Exactly.
Great fighters. And Brockton's a great town. It's so great that a guy from Brockton is now at Harvard. I love that. Not only at Harvard doing polling, but having such an influence on the culture right now in terms of politics, because yes, they were afraid. And as you say in the book, they turned their passion into action. Their efforts have been so consequential in the last 4 or 5 elections, going back to 2000, because the mantra used to be, well, young people are important, but young people don't vote. And this generation of young people has completely flipped the script on that. I was reading about Parkland. Would you say that Parkland was pretty instrumental in the whole rise of Generation Z?
It was certainly kind of a defining moment. And for me, I asked younger people and all Americans kind of what they think, right? So I measure things based upon a change of attitude month over month or year over year. And we saw a significant change of attitudes related to gun safety pre and post Parkland. But I think it may be more accurate to actually widen the lens a little bit. And I think it's a combination of Mandalay Bay, actually, right? On October 1st, 2017 in Las Vegas, and that country music concert and Parkland together. But it was the response of David Hogg, who I talked about extensively in the book, who he and I have become friends after he visited and attended Harvard for 4 years. But it's that moment where younger people essentially kind of challenge their generation and challenge all of us to stand up, and to organize and to take matters into their own hands. And that was a defining moment. And I saw attitudes change, but I also saw wherever these young people organized, wherever there was a protest, wherever there was a rally, we also saw large numbers of young people registered to vote afterwards. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just that they were talking, they were following it up and backing it up. And don't forget, we saw the summer of 2018, we saw our AOC beat back Congressman, I think Crowley, who was a key member of the Democratic coalition, Democratic leadership. Again, I think that was kind of inspired by a lot of younger people. And then in 2018, we saw the largest turnout of recent times among younger people in that midterm election.
Right. So they're turning their anger and their fear and their passion into political action. It's very exciting. And all the examples that you use in the book of the differences of which candidates actually win these elections is really revealing. For example, Barack Obama, right?
When I started this research at the IOP back in 2000, there was essentially no such thing as a generation gap. A younger person in their teens or 20s was just as likely to vote Republican as Democrat. Okay, and that over the course of several years, war, lack of response to natural disasters like Katrina, et cetera, that changed. And what Barack Obama did, and I actually think that a lot of that we saw, personally in Massachusetts, followed up on what Deval Patrick did as well, right? Mm-hmm. They both knew that to win the Democratic primary, they needed to what I call expand the franchise, right? And what then Senator Obama did was he focused on younger people, in particular in Iowa. In fact, a 17-year-old could vote. He tapped into high schools, he tapped into younger people, and he won that under 30 vote, 55%. He won a majority of just that vote. He lost everybody over the age of 30, but it was enough to carry him through. In fact, Hillary Clinton came in third place among younger people. John Edwards came in second place, but I think Hillary got like 10, maybe 11%, and I was actually in New Hampshire and met some of her advisors the next morning where they said supposedly Secretary Clinton had said, find me young people. She had known that the campaign underperformed with younger people, and she tightened that up, went on to win New Hampshire. But I argue in the book that if she just did slightly better in Iowa with younger people, she would have won that Iowa caucus. She already had she was on her way to winning New Hampshire primary, and she likely would have been president if not for just a couple of thousand younger people in Iowa who the Obama campaign really, really invested in and made them an important part of who they were in the leadership of that campaign, and paid dividends.
How important is it to have people around you who are visionary in that respect? Because not all campaigns look to younger people. I mean, the Obama campaign did, but as you say in the book, Hillary had more of the old guard with her, who had come up through the ranks with Bill and in his 8 years in office. And so, but how important is it to have a younger generation of operatives and people who are thinking that way?
I think it's obviously very important, right? It's obviously very, very important because, and I've had a lot of conversations at the IOP, my students and I, we briefed all the campaigns. And I remember, I talk about this in the book, I remember briefing the Obama campaign. We had, I think, 6 or 8 other key of the early state coordinators and managers on that call. They knew they were hungry. They needed to know that they needed to rewrite the framework, in the playbook if they were going to be successful. And it started with younger people. And what I think now we're like, those are millennials. Back then, that was in 2008. Yeah. But 2018, 2020, 2022, I believe that a lot of people now understand and appreciate, the importance that young people play. And I think there's probably more recognition that they do vote and that they do need to kind of be listened to. But then the question is, who around the campaign table is listening and empowering those voices. And I think it's so important that every campaign from city council to mayor to governor to president of the United States needs to have, kind of younger people at the core, at the center of it.
Right. Now, as a pollster, when you took the job, which I thought was really fascinating, you took a leave of absence from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard to work specifically on the Biden campaign. And as a pollster, please explain it to us. What exactly does the pollster do?
So, yes, it was like an incredible honor. As the primary was winding down early summer, the Biden campaign approached me, and the Biden campaign wanted to do things differently. We talked about that. They want to do things differently. And typically you have a lead pollster, and he or she is responsible for a team of other pollsters, and they essentially divide up each of the states. Okay, there's a lead pollster would be in charge with like designing messaging and communication strategy. And then someone would be in charge of Michigan, and someone else would be in charge of Florida, et cetera. What the Biden campaign did was they flipped that. Okay, so we had a couple of pollsters, John Anzalone, who was essentially kind of our chief, with Celinda Lake, who had worked on multiple successful presidential campaigns, going back to the Clinton days, through the Obama days, et cetera. But then the campaign also hired subject matter experts, right? Professor Silas Lee, Dr. Lee from Louisiana, Professor Matt Barreto, who worked on the Hispanic Latino vote, and my team and I worked on the youth vote. So what that meant was that, and we were kind of a collective team, essentially the 5 of us, and we would both review other state polling in terms of younger people, but I would spend, hours and hours in focus groups, with the different constituencies that make up the youth vote, right? Because it's not a kind of monolith. So right. we would via Zoom, because this was during COVID, Jimmy, right? We would kind of zoom into Arizona and talk to younger first-time voters of Hispanic or Latino descent. We would zoom into, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, et cetera. What we wanted to do was to see kind of whether they were motivated to vote and what questions they had. And the common theme I recall from those early days is basically kind of a lack of understanding or connection with Vice President Biden. They had not remembered when he was necessarily in the White House. And it was important through that lens, what we understood is to tell his personal story. So many people take that for granted, but this younger generation didn't know that many of them shared the same kind of working class, blue collar roots that he shared, that he was not necessarily an aristocrat. And that was important because what I want to do as a pollster is find those connected points, right? Before we could talk about messages, we need to talk about values, shared values. Then we need to make
those right?
Exactly. And then we need to make those values are connected to the person and the messenger. And then we can get to the specific messages.
Right. So you're basically taking the temperature of all the young people in various parts of the country. What do they care about? What makes them tick? And reintroducing them to Joe Biden. One of the things I thought that one of the highest compliments I ever heard one politician give another politician was when Barack Obama said, the best thing I ever did was pick Joe Biden as my vice president. That's a tremendous compliment. And this is a very successful president, 2 terms. And, and I just thought that why isn't Biden touting this? That's not bragging. That's just saying, Barack Obama, this is just a quote from Barack Obama. Sure. Maybe Joe doesn't say it, but other people say it for him. It was just a really valuable piece of data that I don't know if they were trying to not blow his own horn or something, but I just thought it would be really valuable. And for the next election as well. But anyway, so you worked with the Biden team, and tell us about the turnout that you were able to deliver for Joe Biden, or help deliver for Joe Biden.
First of all, young people delivered it. I measured it. I helped it along, perhaps. Right? I'm not going to take credit for that, but
I'll give you credit. I give you credit.
All right, I'll take that. That's what I'll take. But listen, for the first time in history, we had a majority. We had over 50%. For the first time in history, a majority of 18 to 29-year-olds turn out. Number one, but even more importantly than that, we saw 61% of those people who vote for Joe Biden. Okay. And that's the magic number. We need to get to 60%. John Kerry got to 55%, lost to Bush. Hillary Clinton got to 56%, lost to Trump. So we needed to both boost overall turnout, record numbers, but also hit that 60% number, which we did. And listen, if the election were in Arizona, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia, the election were only held among people in their 40s and older, Donald Trump is president today. It is the double-digit margin, averaging 20 points among the 18 to 29-year-old group that was responsible for pushing Biden over the finish line in each of those battleground states. In addition to the Biden-Harris ticket narrowing the gap among seniors as well. So he also improved upon Clinton's performance with seniors as well. And that's important, of course, as well.
Right. So looking forward, the issues that are driving young people, guns, climate, choice, immigration reform. How do you think coming into 2024, how do you think young people are going to respond to the Biden-Harris ticket going into 2024 compared to whoever the nominee is for the Republicans?
Well, I think that's a key point, right? Compared to the alternative, right? That's a key point. Elections are about differences. And I think what those issues have in common, and you could add, affordability of housing, to that list as well, access to healthcare, mental health care. But essentially, when you look at all those issues, as you talked about, climate, gun safety, healthcare, housing, et cetera, those are basic fundamental rights in the eyes of younger people. And what they see one party who is doing the best that they can to kind of expand and extend and protect those rights. And they see largely the alternative, the opposite happening from the Republican side at this point. So I think that's what this fight's going to be. It's about protecting and expanding what a generation believes are basic, fundamental, and human rights.
Right. Tell me, John, Is the book written for people my age, or is the book written for the younger folks, or who's the book written for? Because it's a fascinating book. I loved it. It's inspiring. It's easy to read. It's just a snapshot of American history for the last 20 years and how we got where we are and what the different currents are. And who are you trying to reach with the book? Because I think everybody should read it personally.
I started to write it for basically kind of people like us, okay?
Yeah.
People who are our age or older, and to try to, again, interpret and to try to kind of share this like unique voice in this moment in history, and talk about how younger people are already changing this arc of history. Once it was published and once I started talking about it, I actually found that it was as helpful to younger people who don't have the confidence because of the stereotypes, the unfair stereotypes. I think they're seeing it kind of in the media, though. So I wrote it for for basically to kind of be a general audience read, but for, parents of younger people who work and mentor and are kind of connected with them or an important part of their business. But I think it's also given some hope and confidence to younger people because, in the people I've met along the way, some of the stories I elevate, we talked about Parkland, but I mean, one of the most moving experiences was getting to know the story and the background of Darnella Frazier.
Yes.
This is a 17-year-old woman, high school student, Jimmy, right? Who she just wanted to hang out with her friends. It was Memorial Day, right, of 2020 during COVID, and she was at a bonfire in Minneapolis, and she promised her 9-year-old niece that she would take her for ice cream cone. And little did we know that she was the first witness to what her 9-year-old niece called their first murder. And that was the murder at the hands of police of George Floyd, a person's name that we don't know, I think, without Darnella being brave enough to hold that iPhone out there for 10 minutes, because we don't know the other dozen men and women who were killed at the hands of Minnesota police that year, or the 13 before that. So it's just not about their values, but it's also shared these experiences of how younger members of this generation have also had tremendous impact in shaping this country, whether they appreciate that or not.
Right. And as you were saying in the book, they're the most educated and the most technologically savvy, and they're worldly, and they are less prejudiced than the older generations, and they're more politically involved, and they want more things. They want more equality, more equity across the board for everybody. It seems that's what I caught out of the book and the interviews you did with people. She actually won the Pulitzer Prize for that video.
She did. She's a remarkable young woman. And there are a dozen other younger people I talk about. I tell the story of Greta Thunberg as well, who we don't know who Greta is without David Hogg. She cared so much about climate, so much of the environment, but she wasn't able to develop an audience in Stockholm. She says, you know what? I'm going to do what those young Americans did in Florida. I'm going to try a school strike, and a few months later, she has an audience with the Pope. Right. And inspiring younger people, not just in this country, but around the world. These were remarkable people.
Right. Well, the March for Our Lives that came out of the Parkland high school massacre, that was amazing. What's the young woman's name? Emma Gonzalez?
Emma,
is that her name?
now Emma. Now she goes by X Gonzalez. Yeah.
Okay. Emma. And David Hogg and all those folks, that these kids, 17 years old, organized this national movement that dwarfed anything in the past in terms of gun safety rallies. And it was just, and they changed the conversation, and they actually got legislation in several states. And Walmart said they're not going to sell these automatic weapons anymore. And Dick's Sporting Goods had a change of policy, and they used consumerism and consumer pressure. So they're very savvy. They're as you say in the book, they're the most educated, most technologically savvy, the most consumer savvy. And so I finished reading the book feeling hopeful about not only 2024, but the elections to come, because of people like this that are growing up in this country, and they're not apathetic. and they know that they can change things, and it actually makes a difference. So, John, I just want to thank you so much for doing this interview. And where can people get the book? I got my book at the Harvard bookstore, my favorite bookstore. So I want to support the Harvard bookstore. But any bookstore, ladies and gentlemen, fight how Gen Z is channeling their fear and passion to save America. I love it. So how optimistic are you about 2024? What do you think?
I'm cautiously optimistic. Optimistic. Listen, the values of millennials and the values of Gen Z continue to become more such kind of progressive every day in terms of fighting for those more vulnerable. I am somewhat concerned about this cynicism creeping in. So I think one of the things I would ask, you and your audience is to all of us, we need to do what we can to kind of reduce the cynicism and make sure younger people are able to see the change that they've already made in the country by turning out in such high numbers the last 3 elections. And they need to continue to do that.
Right.
It's a very different place because of them.
Right. And do you think that the Biden campaign will get the messaging required to explain to people what they've done with the infrastructure bill, what they've done with green energy and the green economy, what the seeds that they're planting that will bear fruit in the next, few years, and trying to reduce student debt? I mean, that's a big thing.
Yeah. I've said for quite a while that I think the Biden-Harris administration overall has, ironically, been the most youth-friendly organization, the youth-forward administration, probably in my lifetime, number one. And I also know and appreciate how much they care about younger people, and it's going to be an important part of this campaign. And I'm excited for it.
Okay. And that also means all these people watching over 40, like myself, we got to get out there. We got to knock on doors. We got to donate. We got to, call our neighbors, and we have to vote, because it's not just one segment of the population that's going to be the game changer. Everybody has to participate if we want a brighter future. John, I can't thank you enough for doing this interview. Where can people find you if they're interested in not only reading more about you, but is there a website? Can they get the book off your website?
Yeah, so a couple things. So on all the social handles, it's at Della Volpe, DellaVolpe. And I just started a Substack where I'm posting a lot of my original research, JDV on Gen Z. JDV on Gen Z.
On Gen Z. That'll be in the show notes. Your website will be in the show notes if you want it to be. And at Della Volpe, DellaVolpe, at Della Volpe. John, it's great to see you. We will see you on Morning Joe. We'll see you on MSNBC, and we might see you roaming the halls of the Harvard Kennedy School when I go back for my annual comedy performance.
Love it. I'll see you soon, Jerry. Thanks so much.
Great to see you. Thanks a million. Congratulations on the book. It's a great read. It's a great contribution to the culture, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.